Let me also express my happiness at holding this event in Mumbai. Clearly, if we want to bring about a change in perceptions and actions in the corporate sector, then we have to bring that message to Mumbai. This is where all the decision making in the corporate sector takes place, and this is where we can shape the actions of corporate activity for the future. Now, what I'm going to talk about is very brief. My concern is essentially with how corporate activity is impacting on the global commons. And this is not a question of altruism. I think it's essentially an issue that links corporate objectives and benefits with benefits of society. We have for a long period of time been utilizing the global commons in a manner that essentially did not estimate the impacts, particularly the negative impacts that this would have on those commons. And in this respect, let me invoke what Mahatma Gandhi said. He says, you can utilize the resources of nature in any way you want, but in her books, the debits equal the credits. And I think in a number of respects, we are now getting to find out that whatever we had derived by way of credits have actually translated into debits. And here, let me just talk about the issue of climate change. And I was actually going to talk about something else, but this morning, in the meeting of the Executive Committee of the TERI BCST, there was a reference to how the corporate sector should deal with the most recent report that we have brought out from the IPCC. This is the Working Group 1 report, which deals with the physical science basis of climate change. And this particular report was released in Stockholm on the 27th of September. So therefore, it's just hot out of the oven. And I thought this is something that perhaps the corporate sector should get to know about in respect of the kinds of projections, the kinds of observations that have been provided in the report. And obviously, this would have implications for decisions that the corporate sector would take. Well, the first thing I'd like to mention is what my good friend Bjorn Stigson used to say. He used to be president of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and he always said that business cannot succeed in a society which fails. So if there are social problems that affect a large number of people who essentially are going to provide the inputs and would provide the markets for corporate activity, clearly that has implications for the corporate sector as well. Now, just to tell you briefly, this particular report that I'm referring to and some of the findings of which I'll just place before you was prepared by about 259 authors and review editors, as they are called. There were 9,200 items of literature that have been cited and reviewed in this report, and almost two-thirds of these have been published after the year 2007. And I'm mentioning 2007 because that was the year when we brought out the last report, the fourth assessment report of the IPCC. So in other words, this contains a substantial amount of new information. I also want to mention that the IPCC functions in a very transparent manner. We get feedback on all our drafts from a large number of expert reviewers and governments, and a total of almost 55,000 comments were received at various stages of the drafting. And each comment has to be attended to by the authors, and they have to record whether they accept the comment or don't accept it. And if they don't accept it, they have to give reasons for it. This is part of the record which is available to anyone. Now, the first point I'd like to make is that each of the last 3 decades has been successively warmer at the Earth's surface than any preceding decade since 1850. In the Northern Hemisphere, 83 to 2012 was likely the warmest 30-year period of the last 1400 years. You probably read some reports in the media saying that global warming has halted or that there's a pause. And the reason for that is if you take 1998 as the datum and the benchmark from which we look at increases in temperature, yes, you would see a slight decline in respect of previous decades. But the reason for that is that 1998 was an unusually warm year, and therefore anything you estimate beyond that year would essentially be loading the dice. I read a very interesting comment by someone in the insurance industry which said that making that kind of statement is like having someone run a 100-meter dash and have him break the record, and then you make that person run again and you say, well, he's slowed down. Obviously, if you have a year when you've got unusually high temperatures, you can't expect those to be maintained in subsequent years. I'm making this point only because there has been a fair amount of misunderstanding of the issue in the media. I also want to mention that for the first time, we've been able to estimate that a large part of the heat that's been generated as a result of climate change has actually gone into the oceans. In fact, the statement that I'd like to mention is ocean warming dominates the increase in energy stored in the climate system, accounting for more than 90% of the energy accumulated between 1971 and 2010. It's virtually certain that the upper ocean, that means from 0 to 700 meters below, warmed from 1971 to 2010. And it likely warmed between the 1870s and 1971. That means for that entire 100-year period. Now, this has very important implications for marine life. And in fact, you go to certain parts of the world and you'll get direct evidence of the fact that specific stocks of fish have actually moved northwards if you look at the northern hemisphere, simply because with changes in temperature, these particular species are not able to survive, so they move further north. This could have major implications for those companies that are involved in marketing or processing of marine products. I was for several years an external advisor to Unilever, and you're aware that some of the companies that are involved in activities involving marine stocks and marine resources formed something called the Marine Stewardship Council, and Unilever was an important part of it. And the reason was that they wanted to ensure that you don't deplete stocks in the process of earning quick profits, because that clearly will not give you sustainable business. And I'm mentioning all this only because what we need to look at is essentially the fact that some of the changes in climate that are taking place and will take place in the future have very serious implications for business activities. I'll mention just 2 factors that perhaps you need to keep in mind. We brought out a special report 2 years ago on extreme events and disasters, which clearly assessed and came to the conclusion that heat waves and extreme precipitation events are on the increase. And they will increase further in the future in respect of frequency and intensity. Now, I don't want to remind you of what happened in 2005 in Mumbai, when you had this terrible cloud burst. This entire city was completely paralyzed, lives were lost, a large amount of property was destroyed. all this has major implications for business. If you look at Superstorm Sandy, and I'm not for a moment suggesting that either the Mumbai event or what happened, global mean sea level rose by 19 centimeters. That's close to a foot. And in some parts of our coastal areas, that certainly has serious implications. Mr. Mukundan is not here, I believe he's left, but he mentioned the fact that, Tata Chemicals, which is located in Mithapur, which is a highly vulnerable location, very low-lying area, if sea level rise reaches a certain value, it has implications for what Tata Chemicals is doing and is likely to be able to do. One of the direct impacts of sea level rise is the fact that salinity in groundwater goes up substantially, not only in coastal areas, but further onshore. Now, if you look at projections of sea level rise, we have used 4 different scenarios, and the one scenario which is the highest, which essentially represents no action on the part of human society, will give you a total sea level rise of 98 centimeters. Now that's close to a meter. And if you were living in the Maldives Islands, that would give you nightmares, because of the 1,000+ islands in the Maldives, the bulk of them are barely a meter high. And you don't even have to wait till total submergence takes place. Even before that, you'll have storm surges, you'll have coastal flooding and weather and climate events that could place a heavy burden in terms of damage that would occur in those areas. Now, I also want to mention that temperature increase by the end of the century could be as high as 4.8 degrees Celsius. Now, if you're really going to experience that kind of temperature increase, then I think this planet would be a very different place from what we know it to be. Because if you look at the difference in temperatures that has taken place geologically between the Ice Age and interglacial periods, it's roughly of the order of 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. So, and we also estimated that the last time we had the concentration of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere close to what we are heading towards today, we had sea level rise. The sea was about 7 to 8 meters higher. So clearly that alters the entire geography of the planet. Now, if you look at Arctic sea ice, and we may say that we are far away from the Arctic, so why worry? But the fact is, with the melting of the Arctic sea ice, there is going to be a change in the circulation of the oceans, and that has direct implications for the climate further away from the Arctic region. We estimated that Arctic sea ice cover will continue to shrink and thin, and that the northern hemisphere spring snow cover will decrease during the 21st century as global mean surface temperature rises. One important point I'd like to mention is that if we move along the uppermost scenario that we have used in our assessment, then it's very likely that by the middle of this century, September sea ice in the Arctic would vanish completely. September is the one month when you have the lowest amount of ice in the Arctic, because through the summer there is melting that takes place. But by the middle of the century, we could have no Arctic sea ice in the month of September. That's a very strong possibility. Now, all of this may seem like a doomsday scenario, but I think any crisis or any perceived catastrophe that you have also gives you opportunities. And this is where business has remarkable opportunities. The first one of these would be, of course, to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Simply because there's so much inertia in the system, anything we do today is not going to have an immediate impact on the momentum that you already have in the climate system. So some level of impacts are now inevitable, and we'll have to live with them, which means that we have to adapt to them. And for business, this means if you're in a coastal area, what is sea level rise going to do to you? If you're living in a region where, let's say, there's very poor drainage, if an extreme event in precipitation takes place, what are we going to do? Just to give you an example, what happened in Uttarakhand 3 months ago, if that kind of occurrence will repeat itself, I think it has very serious implications for the transport infrastructure over there, even the number of pilgrims that you might allow over there, and most definitely the buildings that are constructed. It is utterly ridiculous that in a location as vulnerable as that, and that too in the floodplain of the rivers over there, you have buildings that are 8 stories high. It's completely out of place. So you would need to bring in place certain regulatory and policy measures by which you adapt to what's going to happen with changes in the climate. That's one aspect. The other aspect is you've got to take steps to improve the efficiency of energy use throughout the cycle, whether it's in buildings or industries or the transport sector. Last week we were in California, where we did an event with the governor of California and his senior staff and the University of California in San Diego, essentially to see how the California experience could be transmitted to the states of India. And we had taken a number of government officials with us who incidentally were very enthused with what they saw over there. And California has been uniquely successful in getting rid of the smog in Los Angeles, where you couldn't breathe 50 years ago, and the high levels of air pollution that you had in the other cities and the highways. So I think there are unique opportunities for bringing about an improvement in the efficiency of energy use, some of which, of course, would require government policy changing in a direction that creates the conditions and the infrastructure for efficiency improvements. And finally, I think the most important opportunity that we see, particularly in the energy sector, is in respect of renewables. Now here again, we in the IPCC had brought out a special report a little over 2 years ago on renewable energy sources and climate change mitigation. The important finding over there was that in a number of applications and locations, renewable energy is already viable. And therefore, if we had the right set of policies and perhaps a removal of some of the subsidies which actually are favoring fossil fuels, renewable energy would be a clear advantage in terms of economics as well. I'll just give you an example of the work that we're doing at TERI. We launched our Lighting a Billion Lives campaign, where using solar lanterns has multiple benefits. These lanterns are lightweight, low cost, and they use LED systems. They provide employment to people in a village, because typically you have a woman who charges these solar lanterns during the daytime using a solar panel on the roof, and then she rents them out at night. We are also setting up microgrids in villages, and I'll just give you one set of numbers and then I can end. Typically, villages in UP and elsewhere would have a microgrid that serves 20 households. And this provides just enough light for an LED lamp in that household and a little bit of electricity for running the blower of an improved cook stove. Now that blower is a fantastic addition to a well-designed cook stove, because it gives you literally perfect combustion. And therefore there are no fumes. The extent of fuel wood you use goes down substantially. The efficiency therefore is much higher. It has health benefits for particularly the women and children who would be sitting around a fire cooking all through the day. Now the economics of this is so attractive. Microgrid connecting 20 households requires an investment of 80,000 rupees. And each household pays 5 rupees a day for getting the benefit of electricity and lighting. And that 5 rupees a day from 20 households translates to 3,000 rupees a month. That's 36,000 a year. So in other words, the investment has a payback of less than 2.5 years. Now, why is it not happening? Well, simply because there's a lack of knowledge, a lack of awareness. You just don't have entrepreneurial capabilities. You don't have easy financing of something like this, because in a village, even providing 80,000 rupees is a lot of money. So if you could bring together all these institutional strengths, then clearly this would become a viable proposition. And you don't have to extend the wire to people's homes from grids, which in any case today will give you very uncertain and very unreliable power supply. And this, in my view, will continue for 3 generations. So today we make it possible for existing generations to get clean, good lighting in their homes, which really transforms their lives. So I think we have to look at development opportunities, business opportunities in the light of some of the impacts of climate change that we're going to see. And climate change, of course, is a direct outcome of what we have done to the atmosphere of this planet. But there are several other forms of global commons where similar exploitation of resources has taken place, and that clearly is going to have a major impact in the future. Just to mention another one, with the extent of carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere, a large part has been absorbed in the oceans, which has led to ocean acidification. And therefore coral reefs are being damaged, and who knows what the impact would be on other forms of marine life. So I think the corporate sector has a direct responsibility both in respect of its own profits and profitability, but also in respect of creating a secure and stable society that ultimately is absolutely essential for the overall success of business. Thank you very much.